You know that feeling when you're dead asleep, floating in that perfect, heavy darkness around 2 a.m., and suddenly a sound rips you back to reality? Not a normal sound, like a branch hitting the window or the house settling, but the distinct, bone-chilling screech of metal grinding against metal coming from inside your own garage. That is exactly how the weirdest, most stressful, and ultimately most satisfying chapter of my life began. I flipped on the bedside lamp, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, trying to process what I was hearing. My first thought was that a raccoon had gotten into the trash cans again, but then came the sound of a heavy thud and a curse word whispered loudly in the dark. I live in what you'd call a generational home. I grew up in this house, and now at 32, I'm back living here to help take care of my parents who are getting up there in years. It's a good arrangement, saves me money in this insane housing market, and I get to make sure my folks are okay. We live in a decent neighborhood, the kind with wide sidewalks and old oak trees. But like a lot of decent neighborhoods, we have a shadow hanging over us in the form of the homeowners association. For years, the HOA was just a background annoyance, like a low-level hum you learn to ignore. But that changed 6 months ago when a woman we'll call Brenda, because she is the absolute embodiment of the name, finally clawed her way into the presidency. Brenda had been running for the board for years, losing every single time because everyone knew she was the type of person who measured grass with a ruler. But voter turnout was low this year, apathy set in, and suddenly, Brenda had the gavel. It was like handing a machine gun to a toddler. Almost overnight, the neighborhood transformed from a friendly community into a surveillance state. Kids couldn't draw with chalk on the sidewalk without a parent getting a warning letter. If your trash can was visible for 10 minutes past pickup time, you got a fine. She had a special fixation on me, though. Maybe it's because I'm younger than most of the homeowners, or maybe she just didn't like the cut of my jib, but she was constantly on my case. She once called the cops on me for parking in front of my own house, claiming I was in a fire lane. When the officers arrived, tired and annoyed, they had to explain to her, slowly, like she was 5, that a standard suburban curb is not, in fact, a fire lane just because she decided it was. But the real madness started when I finally retired my dad's old Toyota Camry. That car was a legend, 20 years of service, odometer spun around twice, but the AC was dead and the transmission was slipping, so I treated myself. I bought a brand new, charcoal gray Ford Explorer. Nothing flashy, just a solid, reliable SUV. I was proud of it. I parked it in the driveway for a week before moving it into the garage to keep it clean. Here is where it gets weird. Twilight Zone weird. 3 weeks after I bought my Explorer, Brenda shows up in her driveway across the street with the exact same car. Same make, same model, same charcoal gray paint job, same trim package. Now, Ford sells a lot of Explorers. It's not a unicorn, but Brenda's family were Honda loyalists. They had 3 Hondas in the driveway. For her to suddenly switch brands and buy the identical twin to my car felt specific. It felt calculated, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe she just saw mine and realized it was a good-looking ride. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Which brings us back to 2 a.m. I grabbed a baseball bat from under the bed, more for comfort than anything else, and crept downstairs. My parents were asleep on the ground floor, and the thought of someone being in the house with them made my blood run cold. The noise was coming from the garage, a rhythmic creak-snap sound. I didn't turn on the hallway lights. I moved like a ghost through the kitchen, hands sweating on the bat, and reached the door connecting the laundry room to the garage. I took a deep breath, ripped the door open, and slapped the light switch. The fluorescent tubes flickered to life, buzzing, and there she was, standing next to my car, wearing a floral bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, holding a 2-foot-long steel crowbar jammed into the window frame of my driver's side door, was Brenda. For a second, neither of us moved. It was just a tableau of suburban insanity. She had scratched the paint down to the primer and dented the pillar, trying to pry the door open like a common thief. "What in God's name are you doing?" I yelled, my voice cracking a little from the adrenaline. Brenda didn't run. She didn't drop the crowbar. She didn't look guilty. She looked furious. She pulled the crowbar out, pointed it at me like a weapon, and screamed, "Don't you move. I've already called 911. They're on their way to arrest you." I stood there, bat lowered, completely baffled. "You called the police?" "Brenda, you broke into my house. You're breaking into my car." "This is my car," she shrieked, her face turning a violent shade of red. "You stole it from my driveway tonight. I knew you were a criminal. I knew it." The sheer conviction in her voice was terrifying. If I hadn't known for a fact that I bought that car, I might have believed her. Before I could even process the absurdity of it, sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder fast. She wasn't bluffing. She had actually called the cops on me while actively committing a felony in my garage. When the officers burst in, guns drawn because the call came in as a robbery in progress, it was chaos. They saw a man with a bat and a woman with a crowbar. They ordered us both to drop the weapons and get on the ground. I complied instantly, spreading my hands, shouting, "I live here. This is my house." Brenda, on the other hand, was hysterical, screaming that I was a car thief and a menace. They separated us. One officer took me to the living room while the other took Brenda out to the driveway. My parents woke up during the commotion, terrified, shuffling out in their pajamas. My dad, bless his heart, went into full protective mode, telling the officers, "That's my son, that's his car, and that woman is crazy." Having two elderly homeowners vouch for me de-escalated things quickly on my end. The officer looked at my ID, looked at the photos on the wall, and realized I wasn't an intruder. But outside, Brenda was digging her own grave. Through the open front door, I could hear her ranting. "He stole it." I woke up and my Explorer was gone from the driveway. "I tracked it here. He's been eyeing it for weeks." The officer outside was patient, I'll give him that. "Ma'am," he asked, "are you sure your car is missing?" "Yes. Look at my driveway. It's empty." The officer walked 10 feet across the street, shined his flashlight onto her driveway, and there, sitting peacefully under the streetlight, was Brenda's charcoal gray Ford Explorer. He walked back to her. "Ma'am, your vehicle is right there." You'd think that would be the moment she folded. You'd think reality would crash in. But Brenda simply pivoted. That's a decoy." He switched them. He put his old one there and took the good one. "Check the VIN." So they did. They ran the VIN on her car. Registered to Brenda. They ran the VIN on the car in my garage, the one she had just mauled with a crowbar. Registered to me. Purchased 3 weeks prior. When the sergeant came back inside to talk to me, he looked exhausted. "Sir, I'm sorry for the disturbance. Your neighbor appears to be confused. We're going to be charging her with breaking and entering, attempted grand theft auto, and vandalism." They cuffed her. As they led her to the cruiser, she wasn't screaming anymore. She was muttering to herself, staring at me with dead, shark-like eyes. They didn't take her to jail, though, because of how erratic she was acting, insisting that reality was wrong and she was right. They took her for a mandatory psychiatric hold. A $5,150. I spent the next morning dealing with insurance agents and body shops, thinking it was over. But Brenda was released 2 days later, and apparently, the hold hadn't fixed whatever was broken inside her. If anything, it focused her rage. She couldn't arrest me, so she decided to ruin me using the only power she had left, the HOA. The fines started arriving like confetti. Monday, $50 for unsightly weeds. My lawn was manicured. Tuesday, $100 for improperly stored refuse bins. They were behind the gate. Wednesday, $250 for noise violation at 3 p.m. on a Saturday. I didn't pay a dime. I documented everything. I took photos of my grass with a timestamp app. I took photos of my bins. I saved the letters. I built a dossier that would make the FBI proud. The escalation point came 2 months later. I was in the backyard on a sunny Saturday afternoon, mowing the lawn. I had my headphones in, minding my own business, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I spun around, nearly taking a swing, and there was Brenda. She had unlatched my back gate, walked into my private, fenced-in backyard, and was standing there with a clipboard. "You are violating the noise ordinance," she yelled over the dying spin of the mower blades. "It is 2 p.m. Quiet hours are enforced. Quiet hours are from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. I said, pulling out my phone and hitting record. "Brenda, you are trespassing. Again. Get off my property." "I am the president," she shouted, getting right in the camera lens. "I have the right to inspect violations. You are going to pay for what you did to me. I will take this house. I will put a lien on it so fast your head will spin." I didn't argue. I just kept recording as she ranted for another 3 minutes about how I was a thief and a con artist before storming out. That video was the final nail. I didn't just go to the police this time. I went to the neighbors. I started a group chat. It turned out I wasn't the only one. Brenda had been terrorizing half the block, fining the Johnsons for a non-compliant mailbox, threatening the Smiths because their kids drew hopscotch squares. We compared notes. We realized she was fabricating violations to cover the legal fees from her break-in charge. Then, a neighbor sent me a screenshot from the private HOA Facebook group, a group I had been banned from months ago. Brenda was posting long, unhinged rants about me. She was calling me a predator, implying I was dangerous, and telling people to watch their children around my house. That was libel. That was harassment. That was the endgame. I took the video of her trespassing, the stack of fake fines, the police report from the break-in, and the screenshots of her Facebook posts, and I walked into the police station. I filed a formal criminal harassment complaint. 2 days later, I was at work when my neighbor texted me, "It's happening. Look outside." I wasn't home, but I pulled up my Ring doorbell feed. 2 cruisers were in front of Brenda's house. Officers were at the door. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I saw Brenda's body language. She was pointing, waving her arms, poking the officer in the chest. Bad move. The officer grabbed her wrist. She pulled back and took a swing, a clumsy, flailing slap that connected with the officer's shoulder. She was on the ground in seconds. They hauled her up, handcuffed her, and put her in the back of the car. But then, the ambulance arrived. My neighbor told me later that she started screaming that she knew the police chief, that she was going to have them all fired, that she was a sovereign citizen, just a word salad of delusion. They took her back to the hospital for a longer evaluation this time. The aftermath was swift. The HOA board, realizing they were liable for a president who was actively harassing residents and getting arrested, held an emergency meeting. They voted to remove her immediately. They sent out a letter, a very humble, apologetic letter, stating that all fines issued in the last 6 months were under review. 3 weeks later, I got a check in the mail. A refund for every bogus fine she tried to levy, plus interest. Brenda eventually came home, but she's different now. She's quiet. She doesn't walk the neighborhood with her clipboard. Her car sits in the driveway, gathering dust. I think the realization that she isn't the main character of the universe finally broke her. Or maybe it was the legal fees. Either way, the neighborhood is peaceful again. But every now and then, when I hear a noise in the garage at night, I still grab the bat. Old habits die hard. Speaking of bad habits, let me tell you about a different kind of domestic nightmare. You think a crazy neighbor is bad? Try living with a stepfather who thinks hygiene is a suggestion. I moved out for college, but for a year before that, I lived with my mom and her new husband, Rick. Rick was a nice enough guy on the surface, but behind closed doors, he was a biohazard. I'm talking about a man who would shave his beard and leave a carpet of hair covering the entire sink and faucet. A man who would take a bath, which is fine, but then drain the water and leave a ring of gray scum and dead skin around the tub like a crime scene outline. And the toilet? Let's just say Rick's aim was more of a general vicinity suggestion than a target. I was the one cleaning the bathroom every morning because I refused to shower in a swamp. I asked him nicely. I asked my mom to talk to him. He'd just laugh and say, "I'm a man. I'm rugged. Rugged is chopping wood. Rugged is not leaving pee on the floor tiles, Rick." So, I decided to fight fire with fire. Or rather, filth with filth. I initiated Operation Boomerang. It started subtly. Every time he left the toilet unflushed, which was horrifyingly often, I didn't flush it. I took a high-resolution photo of it and texted it to my mother with the caption, "Rick left you a present." After 3 of these texts while she was at work, she started yelling at him the second she walked in the door. But the real revenge was in the bathroom itself. When he left his beard trimmings all over the sink, I didn't wipe them up with a paper towel. I picked up his toothbrush, his precious electric toothbrush, and used the bristles to sweep the hair into a pile. Then I rinsed it, briefly. When he left those yellow droplets on the toilet seat, I didn't use Clorox wipes. I used his face towel, the fluffy white one he hung right next to the sink. I'd wipe the seat clean, and then hang the towel back up, perfectly folded. The psychological warfare began to take effect within days. He started complaining at breakfast. "My face cloth smells kinda musky," he'd say, sniffing his hands. "And I swear I'm getting hair in my mouth when I brush my teeth." My mom and I would just shrug. "Maybe you should clean the bathroom more often, Rick." Bacteria spreads. It took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of me using his personal hygiene products as janitorial supplies before he cracked. He started cleaning. He started flushing. He became the Mr. Clean of the household because he was terrified of the mysterious grime that seemed to haunt him. I moved out for college thinking the war was won. But I came back last week for a visit, and guess what? The hair is back in the sink. So, if you'll excuse me, I know exactly where his toothbrush is, and the toilet seat is looking a little dusty. But you know, sometimes the mess isn't inside the house. Sometimes, the mess is the entire neighborhood, and the people who are supposed to help you clean it up are the ones trying to bury you. A few years back, my town in Texas got hit by a tornado. It was devastating. Roofs ripped off, windows shattered, fences gone. My house, which was a 100-year-old historic build, took a beating. It was uninhabitable. During the storm and the immediate aftermath, when we were pulling tarps over holes and checking on neighbors, the HOA was invisible. They vanished. No support, no emergency funds, nothing. But the second the insurance checks cleared and the contractor's truck showed up, the HOA board crawled out of the woodwork like termites. I decided that if I had to rebuild, I was going to do it right. The house was drafty, inefficient, and expensive to run. I wanted double-paned windows, better insulation, and most importantly, a modern metal roof with integrated solar panels. I was tired of paying $400 a month for electricity in the Texas heat. I submitted my plans to the town. Approved immediately. They were happy I was investing in the property. Then I submitted them to the HOA. Denied. I called the board president. Why? You have to rebuild the house exactly as it was, he said. We need to maintain the historic character of the neighborhood. It's 100 years old, I argued. They don't even make single-pane leaded glass windows anymore. And I'm not putting asphalt shingles back on. They blew away in 10 minutes. I want a metal roof and solar. Solar panels are unsightly, he sniffed. They lower property values. Request denied. If you proceed, we will fine you. I tried to play nice. I cited the state laws. I showed them the designs that hid the panels from the street view. They didn't care. It was about control. So, I did what any reasonable Texan would do. I built it anyway. It looked beautiful. The metal roof was sleek, the solar panels were efficient, and my electric bill dropped to zero. I was actually selling power back to the grid. Then the letters came. $100 a day. Then $500 a week. Within months, they claimed I owed them $32,000 in fines. They sued me. They actually took me to court to put a lien on my house or force me to tear the roof off. I walked into that courtroom without a lawyer because I knew something they didn't. I had done my homework. The judge was an older guy, no nonsense. He looked at the HOA's lawyer and asked, "Let me get this straight. You want this man to tear off a roof that meets all state safety codes and replace it with inferior materials because you think it's ugly?" "It's in the bylaws, Your Honor," the lawyer argued. "Historical preservation." "I read your bylaws," the judge said, flipping through a file. "They were written in 1995. They say nothing about solar prohibition. And are you aware of the Texas Property Code regarding solar access rights?" The lawyer stuttered. "The state law supersedes your aesthetic preferences," the judge ruled. "And furthermore, fining a man for upgrading his home after a natural disaster is unconscionable. Case dismissed. And frankly, you should be paying his legal fees." I walked out of there feeling 10 feet tall. But I wasn't done. The lawsuit was the final straw. I started talking to my neighbors. It turned out, the HOA had been fining everyone. They fined the widow down the street because she couldn't match the paint color of her siding perfectly, because the paint company went out of business in 2005. They fined a family for letting their displaced cousin stay in a trailer in the driveway while their own house was being fixed. They were kicking people while they were down, trying to profit off the disaster. So, I organized a coup. At the next annual meeting, the room was packed. People were angry. I stood up and laid it all out. Where was the emergency fund? I asked. We pay dues every month. Why wasn't that money used to help clear debris? Why is it being used to sue me for having a secure roof? The board tried to shout me down, but the crowd wasn't having it. We held a vote of no confidence right then and there. Every single board member was recalled. We elected a new board that night. People who actually lived in the neighborhood and cared about it. When the new treasurer opened the books, we found out why the old board was so aggressive with fines. They had drained the reserve fund. They had been using HOA money for administrative lunches and consulting fees paid to their own companies. The new board didn't just stop the fines. They started using the money correctly. They helped people rebuild. And as for me, I make sure to mention my negative electric bill to every single person I meet, just to keep the spirit of petty victory alive. But sometimes you can't sue your enemies. Sometimes you can't vote them out. Sometimes you have to work with them, and you can't afford to blow up your career. That's when you have to get creative. I have a colleague, let's call him Steve. Steve is senior to me, so I have to be respectful. But Steve is also a bully. He makes snide comments about my hearing aid. He interrupts me in meetings, and he's just generally a prick. But Steve has a weakness. Steve is obsessed, and I mean obsessed, with a certain very popular fantasy book series about wizards. You know the one. He spends hours on Reddit debating fan theories and lore. One day, I saw his screen over his shoulder and memorized his username. I didn't dox him. I didn't report him. I did something far more annoying. I created an alternate account. And now, whenever Steve is being particularly nasty to me at work, I go home, log in, find his latest passionate post about wizard genealogy, and I reply with the most confidently incorrect information possible. I'll say things like, actually, in Chapter 4, they clearly state that the magic comes from midichlorians. Or, why didn't they just fly the eagles to the volcano? Mixing up entirely different franchises just to watch his brain melt. He takes the bait every single time. He will write 5-paragraph essays correcting me, furious that someone could be so wrong. And the next day at work, he'll come in looking tired and grumpy, complaining about idiots on the internet who don't understand the canon. And I just sit there, sipping my coffee, nodding sympathetically, and saying, wow, Steve, that sounds really frustrating. People sure are dumb. It's not justice exactly, but it keeps me sane. And in a world full of Brendis and corrupt HOAs, sometimes sanity is the biggest one you can get. If you've ever had to get creative to deal with a bully, let me know in the comments. And remember, keep your receipts, know your rights, and never, ever let them see you sweat. Catch you in the next one.